Yeah, hello everybody. It's 1 o'clock, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to this choice event number 82, Navigating Climate Transition Plans. My name is Josepha. I'm the growth marketing lead at Climate Choice, and I'm very happy to see many of you now here today. And for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, also a very warm welcome from the entire Climate Choice community. It's really great to see that there's so many people ready out there in the world to dive into one of the most pressing topics in corporate climate action, namely Scope 3 decarbonization. And if you're now asking who we are, well, we are Climate Choice, your climate intelligence platform and source for primary supplier data, helping your procurement and sustainability teams move beyond manual data management to really accelerate Scope 3 action and drive measurable impact with your suppliers. And this choice event is actually part of our ongoing webinar series where we showcase best practices from our customers and partners on how to successfully implement Scope 3 decarbonization strategies and also make them part of usual business. Now, we know that this webinar actually comes at a time when there's a lot of discussion ongoing on the current Omnibus Simplification Package. And also many companies are actually facing or seeing uncertainties about the future of climate transition plans. Yet what we want to show you today is that one things remain clear. Climate transition plans are and will remain essential, not only for regulatory compliance, but also to align your corporate strategies with climate targets and to respond to growing market demands. And to bring all of these insights to life, I'm actually super thrilled to introduce today's guest speaker, who is a passionate sustainability leader with over 17 years of experience at Nestle in various procurement and sustainability roles, who is also a member of our Climate Choice Advisory Board and founder of Findic, a consultancy dedicated to enabling companies design and implement effective sustainability strategies. And with that, a very, very warm welcome to Corinna Weinmiller. Hi, Corinna.
Hi, Josepha. Hi to everyone else.
Hi, it's so nice to have you. How are you doing? How has your day been so far?
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm just looking forward for the next hour and to let you all know what the climate transition plan is all about and to go into discussion into the Q&A later on. So happy. Thank you very much for inviting me, Josepha.
Yeah, thank you for being with us here today. And I mean, maybe to also, like close the loop to what I mentioned earlier, the EU Omnibus Directive. I mean, this has been a major topic of discussion now. If you just look on the LinkedIn profiles, I think of everybody being involved in
Yep.
the field of sustainability. And since we know that it is on everybody's mind, I'm actually really glad to have my dear colleague Lara with us today. She's the co-founder of Climate Choice, a beautiful voice to myself, and she will be here today to provide us with a short overview of what the EU Omnibus Directive actually is about, the ongoing discussions also, and potential changes that we see, but also linking back to Corinna, because in the end, we want to see why climate transition plans will remain essentially despite upcoming revisions. So with that, a very warm welcome also, Lara.
Yeah, thanks. I'm super happy we were able to set up a very spontaneous webinar also because we really saw that there are so many questions and we just had the chance to have a masterclass with Corinna going deep in the topic, and then we just saw like customers of us and like other people reaching out like what's actually happening and how can climate transition plans also help. So that's why I'm excited to take the chance this week before probably next week we have to set up a new webinar.
That's it. But let's now concentrate on today. And you mentioned that you take on the chance, but it's also a challenge, I guess, to, like navigate the discussion correctly in these current times. So, Lara, why don't you kick us off with a short overview on Omnibus so that we set the stage then also for Corinna?
Yeah, happy to do so. And as normal, I would also love to start actually with everyone joining here so that it's not just us or me sharing insights, because here I guess we are all involved. So I love to see first or to give you a chance to participate. You should have a small survey on your screen right now. And it is the question, Actually, I think I have to read out the questions not showing correctly. Like Omnibus, what is it doing for you? What do you assume? Will it mainly increase uncertainty? Will it enable less reporting and less burden, less data points? Will it reduce the meaning maybe that you have been seeing in all the sustainability reporting guidelines? Will it postpone your own work in sustainability, or will it create new opportunities? So excited to see maybe first what are your assumptions, because yeah, I think we are all in that journey right now, and every answer is right. And yeah, I see many of you are choosing, but also it's very distributed for now. But I think gonna share it, and you should also see the result on your screen. But I read it out also. 42% say, okay, it will bring less burden and data points. That's what the whole discussion is about. So at least we have all the same understanding. How it plays out is in another story, because also 25% of you say it will postpone sustainability work. And then, yeah, 8% say it increases uncertainty, and 17 even say there is a chance for new opportunities. So I love that we have these different, yeah, ideas in mind how everything can play out. And now, yeah, as Josefa said, I try to give a small introduction to the topic, because I think from everything that we read online, yeah, there is a lot of uncertainty, and for sure we can also not say what will happen next week. But we can start first with the foundation, so to really also bring clarity into what the Omnibus is all about. So it's called to be a simplification package, and that's what everyone has, or not everyone, 42% of you have also said. You see it as a chance for simplification and less data points. And why is that simplification may be needed? What is argued is that we have had under the EU Green Deal that aims to really align everything in all the activities, specifically also in business and industry in the EU with the Paris Agreement. So where we are committed to reduce our emissions by half until 2030, and then reach net zero latest 2050. And to do so, there have been several guidelines, reporting frameworks. The first one was the EU Taxonomy, mainly driven from the financial market, that was already adopted in 2020. Then we had the adaptation of the CSRD. We will go a little bit deeper into that, connected to the transition planning as well. And then we have also the CSDDD impacting sustainability in supply chain specifically. And now we see that there are different guidelines, and the discussion is how much are they aligned? Are they all bringing different burdens of reporting? The EU has been arguing already before, and also a lot of experts have been working on it to align these standards with each other. But for sure, there are not always overlaps, and everything could be more simplified when you bring it down to different industries, company sizes, and so on. And that's maybe a little bit the timeline of the ongoing discussion. I call it so far a true crime story. We will see what the plotting and the end will bring. But actually, it's not a new discussion that just popped up now a week ago or like 2 months ago. It was actually already in the end of 2023 that von der Leyen said there must be a significant reduction of reporting efforts specifically, or burden specifically for SMEs. Back then it was not that concrete, but then a year later, in the end of 2024, she was introducing the first time the wording of the competitive compass for the EU, and in there also repeated that there should be a reduction of reporting burden. And that led in January towards having different leaked documents. One was a letter of Scholz, also claiming that there should be a reform of the CSRD specifically, and maybe a delay even of it. But meanwhile, we had several companies, also it was around 400 in France that signed together one letter, but then also one specific one where even Nestle was part of it. where they really claimed, okay, we have been doing a lot of work already. We see sustainability reporting actually as an advantage for us or to drive competitiveness. And they really want to have, first and foremost, clarity on what they want to do or what they need to do. And so it's a little bit contradicting. On the one hand, we have a market that's already in preparation. And then on the other hand, we have politicians discussing a potential reform even. And then later in Jan, we had the compass, competitive compass being disclosed, so to say, by the EU. And it has like three major areas: innovation, decarbonization, and security. And in the decarbonization area, specifically the sustainability reporting can and will be reviewed of what is happening so far. And now we just had very recently again also a position paper from the German government where it had different sayings than what we had been reading in the letter from Scholz, so that there should be no delays, but that there should be different adaptation specifically of the double materiality, which will never be my most famous word. And so we are in the area that we see, okay, we have the different sustainability reportings being published and adapted. We do see that there is an omnibus coming under this competitive compass, but which changes exactly will be made are not yet clear. Possible changes would definitely decrease the amount of criteria and also the scope for which companies, they are binding. So there's a discussion of increasing the amount of employees for smallest companies being affected. There could be postponements, even though there's a big group of companies, and even now the position in paper of Germany against it. Liabilities could be affected. And then also this big part of climate transition plans being still an essential part of it, but maybe there's a discussion around bringing guidance through standardization and forms. And before we go deeper into that, and before I want to bring a small conclusion of the whole discussion, that's where I might have a second survey for you. And I try to bring it up quickly. So here, before we have the discussion unfolding later on transition plans, what is actually your standing towards transition planning? Have you been starting it already as part of your reporting? So maybe you would be part of these companies that say, I'm already prepared, I know what to do. Please keep what it is. Or are you not sure if it's even relevant for your company? Or is it a topic that you haven't been starting looking into because it's not your department's work, it's maybe with a C-level? Or are you yet still confused? You have not been looking into it? Or is it actually a new term that you haven't maybe been part of working on so far? And again, it's anonymous. There's no right and wrong. And I see, actually, very interesting. I'm going to share it. So that's what we get very often. That's why we also have the webinar. I did not look yet into climate transition plans. So even companies we work with that are deep down in their CSRD reporting, seem to have this part not yet as or often as a major maybe topic where they look into. But then also 29% of you say we have already done it, and I assume it's part of CSRD and or other reporting areas. So then I have my last quick slide. As said, next week there should be the final announcement, or for now final, we will see where it is, where the changes and adaptations going to be public about the omnibus discussion. So far the discussion was rather closed. Beside the leaked documents. But what we find more and more building up in the discussion around the omnibus is that we really see everyone, including the EU, but then also big companies and lobbies around the topic, actually talk about a shift in sustainability reporting coming from moving away from just the focus on compliance and which indicators maybe need to be in their criteria, moving towards actually how can we use every the frameworks we have and the different concepts that are also part specifically now then in the CSRD and the climate transition planning that help us to come towards a growth mindset, and a competitive mindset is a wording that the EU uses. And that's what we really love to explore also here today in the webinar, to see beyond what's going on in compliance and what will be exactly written down, how can we maybe use the frameworks that are already out there to be future ready and drive in a market that is full of uncertainties, and find maybe an own path for clarity and or operational actions to really go into a climate transition. And that's what I can bring from my side, and would love to hand over to Josefa and Corinna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lara. I mean, for setting the scene so nicely on the current discussions. And I think it's going to be interesting for sure, the upcoming days and weeks, what kind of developments we will see. But I also believe, and I really thank you so much also for this last slide, where you really showcased again that no matter what happens in the regulatory landscape, climate transition plans will remain a cornerstone for concrete Scope 3 action. And with that, I would actually also like to find slowly but surely the transition actually to Corinna, who is already here with us. And Corinna, I mean, you have more than 20 years of international experience actually in purchasing, but also in sustainability. And you have been previously shaping within a company and now support shaping others and their corporate climate strategy. And from what I was, reading in different blog posts on your LinkedIn, etc., you have a very clear perspective on the fact that sustainability cannot run in parallel, but is actually or needs to be an integral part of corporate culture, not just for compliance, but really as a way to enhance corporate value and engage stakeholders at every level. So from shareholders to employees, also driving the change.
Correct.
And so before we dive into today's discussion, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? And I'm pretty sure that our audience would also love to hear about your journey a little bit.
Thank you, Josefa. Yeah. So let me introduce myself. So hi to everyone. I'm Corinna Weinmiller. So last year I founded the sustainability and communication consultancy called Findig GmbH together with my brother. But like Josefa said before, I quite have a large background in sustainability and procurement. So what was my background before? So when I started business administration in Cologne, with a master in procurement, I did not think about sustainability at all, So I started working as a consultant in a smaller procurement consultancy. And by then I had to move from Cologne to Frankfurt, which was a shame actually, but well, now I love it. So we had to move to Frankfurt. And then I applied for Nestle Germany. And actually, I started for Nestle. I worked for Nestle since 18 years, quite a long time. And I first started in procurement, in being a strategic procurement buyer, being in the co-manufacturing, became a team lead for the raw material and packaging buying teams. And as part of my job, I traveled to the countries of the origin where Nestle buys the raw materials from, like vanilla from Madagascar and palm oil from Malaysia, cocoa, coffee from Indonesia and other regions, But this is really when I experienced what kind of risk, opportunities, and hurdles they are still in the supply chain and what it looks like at the origin, really. And this is where I discovered my passion for going into the sustainability sector. First, it was still within procurement, but then it moved and became a whole sustainability team. And 8 years, all in all, I worked in sustainability for Nestle. I set up sustainability strategies for Maggi, for Wagner Pizza, for Tomi brand, other brands that like all of you do, I calculate footprints, I calculate CCFs and PCFs and so on. I set up projects together with the suppliers. This is actually one of my main topics I did in those 8 years, especially to remove emissions and to build up biodiversity activities. Yeah. And for sure, like every sustainability manager these days, I worked a lot on the reporting side, But I experienced, like Josefa, like you said, procurement is nothing that you do just for the reporting itself. Reporting is important to show where you are, but it's really more to get a company moving, to start thinking differently, you know? And from my point of view, I think it's always about you have to go beyond the reporting stuff, but really dig deep into where there is a risk also for the companies, also important, but also to change the minds. It's not something that can be done within 1 or 2 years. It will last longer, you know, to do the mind switches. But yeah, and this is where I am right now. In 2023, I quit working for Nestle. And I use now all the knowledge that I gained there to give it to other companies. And this is last year when my brother and I founded the consultancy Findig GmbH.
Nice. I love it. And I mean, you've been going through a journey yourself, right, with that. So I think
Correct.
also what we see with many companies, you start at one point, then you go to different other points. And in the end, I mean, in your case, it does all make sense. So bringing it all together now at Findig. And I think what is really cool is what you bring now to the table in the discussion that we will, or in the presentation that will be upcoming, is that you have both the internal perspective and now the external perspective. So, I mean, you've been sitting there, you got your hands dirty already, and now you go with that knowledge to the world. And so, I mean, we are all very keen to see the presentation. And just before we go into it, I would actually like to also encourage everybody to really use the question function here in Zoom. So type in your questions. We will have a Q&A round at the end. So this is, again, your room. Shape it with the interaction that you want to bring to the table between Lara and Corinna. And with that, the stage is yours. And also, just a quick disclaimer, there were some comments coming in that sometimes you couldn't see us on camera. So if this is the case, just keep on like writing it. Sometimes it helps to just switch off and on the camera again. But otherwise, we hope that you can still enjoy the webinar. And so now, Corinna, the stage is yours.
Thank you. I think, Josefa, I think you still have to let me show the presentation, and then I can share my screen.
Yes.
Yes, it's working right now. Perfect.
Then Lara and I, we are with you, but we go off camera. So all the focus is on you.
Wonderful. So you can see my screen. Is that everything is working?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, super nice. So everyone, over the next 20 minutes, I will explain what is a climate transition plan and who is demanding it, what are the requirements and difficulties about the climate transition plan, and how the climate transition plan interacts with the CSRD. And furthermore, we are taking a look at some of the best practices of suppliers with climate transition plans in place and how they set up.
A quick comeback.
Yeah.
Somehow people tell us they cannot see the screen, even though I can see it. And I'm also joining. Maybe you can write us in the comment again. Is there someone who can see the screen? I can see it. Okay. Then it might look as it is a setup of, we cannot see it. I think because it comes from the same area, maybe it's a browser issue. Maybe you can log in again for those where it doesn't show up. Yeah, works. For most people, it works. Sorry, Corinna, for interrupting you.
No worries.
I can see
No
everything.
worries.
I hear you clearly. For everyone where it doesn't work, we also have a recording. We're going to send that around later. And everything looks fine. But if it doesn't work in Zoom for now, maybe you want to log out and come in again, and or have a look for your setup in the audio. But yeah, Corinna, please continue. I can see you, hear you, and there are some people for whom it works.
Super. Well, actually, it would be a pity if you don't see the slides. So I hope most of you can now see it. Otherwise, take a look at YouTube later on. That would also be helpful. Yeah. So, like I said, I'm going to explain today what is a climate transition plan, what are the requirements, how they interact with the CSRD, and then we also going to take a look at some of the best practices of suppliers that have a CTP in place. Yeah. And all of those suppliers or all of those companies actually have set up engagement programs to address scope 3 decarbonization. So that's also interesting to take a look. So let's go. in general. So the journey when a sustainability manager starts the climate journey, what should it conduct if you start the journey? In general, the journey should conduct 5 elements. First of all, the company should for sure calculate its footprint, the corporate carbon footprint, the CCF. And then based on the footprint, the analysis of the risk of a company has to be calculated and see, okay, what are the risks really that the climate has on the company and that the company actually has on the climate, so vice versa. And then when they have set up the risk management, the company should define SBTi targets and roughly calculate how to reduce and how to remove. And the fourth element is to go then into the detailed planning by setting up a climate transition plan. And this is actually what we're talking about today. And in the end, after the climate transition plan is made, then finally the reporting starts year by year, often done with a CDP. So currently, the climate transition plan is requested by the CSRD and the CSDDD directives. So let's take a look where we can find the climate transition plan in the easy to understand and entertaining ESRS directive of the CSRD. So I assume this looks quite familiar for you, but just to put us all on the same level of information, the CSRD conducts 12 ESRS standards, 2 general ones, 5 in environmental, 4 in social, and 1 in governance. And the requirements regarding climate can be found in the standard ESRS E1. Yeah, so this one right here. So let's take a further look where the climate transition plan really is mentioned in the standard E1. So the standard ESRS E1 climate is structured in 3 pillars. The first pillar is strategy. The second pillar is the management of the impact, the risk, and the opportunities, called IROs. And then the third pillar are the targets and the measures. And let's take a look at the first pillar again. It's the strategy pillar. And this is where the E11 is confirming the requirement of a climate transition plan. So what exactly is a climate transition plan? How it is described? The International Sustainability Standards Board, called ISSB, defines 6 elements of a climate transition plan. So let's go through all of the elements of a climate transition plan real quick. The first element is the governance, meaning that the board or the management should take over responsibility for climate and integrate the climate strategy and the actions of it into the corporate strategy, meaning it should be implemented and for sure it needs to be communicated internally as well as externally. The second element are to set climate targets. For the climate transition plan, it's important that for all scopes, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, needs to be a target set, and it needs to be scientifically sound, ideally aligned with SBTi. So meaning short-term until 2030, and more challenging would be until 2015. Third element of a climate transition plan is to define strategies and measures. So meaning, how should the plan be implemented? So the company needs to explain precisely what activities and projects are planned year by year and how the efforts will be measured. The fourth element is the risk management, meaning what risks and opportunities are occurring, what is the impact on the business model. The fifth element, also very important here, because you often don't have it in the roadmaps, the financial planning. The company needs to list precisely how much CAPEX and OPEX is invested for each activities. Does the company, for example, needs to invest in new technologies? And then the sixth element, we talked about that, is the monitoring and the reporting of a climate transition plan. So the CDP, the organization called Climate Disclosure Project, was a little bit more detailed in saying what is a climate transition plan. and enumerated 15 elements that a climate transition plan should have. But as you can see, they're totally in line with the ISSB on the left side. What I do like about the CDP definition is, what they did quite well, was to compare which elements of the CTP are also required in the CSRD guideline. And here they are mentioning the ESRS standards. And it's striking that if you implement the ESRS standard for climate, that you almost have a CTP in place. So this is actually the good news. So now let's take a look at how many companies already have a CTP in place. The Carbon Disclosure Project published a study in June 2024, and they asked around 23,000 companies who reported on climate change. Yeah, it's a worldwide figure actually, from 14 sectors and 129 countries. And the outcome was that only 25% had a climate transition plan conducted, really. So it's similar to what Lara asked you a few minutes ago. And from those 25% who had a climate transition plan, only 2% of the companies had a satisfactory climate transition plan. That means that all of the 21 indicators that CDP asked for were really in line with what they asked for. So looking at the outcome of this question, the question is, what makes it so difficult to set up a climate transition plan? Most companies already have a so-called climate roadmap in place. But what is the difference really between a climate roadmap and a climate transition plan? I've summarized the most important differences for you here. So let's go through the most important ones. How is a climate roadmap defined? The climate roadmap often is more like a strategic tool that is individually set up by a company and has no special requirements from the legislation. There are often targets and milestones described, but often they're not necessarily SBTi confirmed. Yeah, and often they only talk about 2030 and 2050, but that's it. No 10-year steps in between. And very often they only talk about scope 1 and scope 2. They don't necessarily take scope 3, or they don't integrate scope 3 in it, or they don't have a target for scope 3. And often it's described broadly how the targets should be achieved. Then on the right-hand side, there is a climate transition plan. And how is it defined? It's more an operational tool. And this is important here. It should not be like it should be like a more comprehensive action plan with a stronger focus on the implementation, really going into activities and then measures also. Yeah, the measures should be categorized in 5-year steps. At least this is, by the way, mentioned in the CSDDD. And regarding the measures, it is required to give details about the quantification of investments, really. It's not about the total sum that you want to put into climate. It's really about how much money do you want to put on the action A, on the action B, and on the action 3. Yeah. For sure, the target must be aligned with a 1.5 degrees Celsius path of the SBTi, and scope 3 needs to be included in the target setting. So what makes the CTP so challenging in the course of an implementation? What do other companies say? So besides talking about the resource problems, I think that most of the companies have these days, and the strategic integration, let me point out 2 challenges here. The first challenge is the data collection for the corporate carbon footprint, so for the CCS. We all know that to define scope 1 and scope 2 emissions is fairly easy. But when it comes to scope 3, you have to rely often only on secondary data based on literature. And this is actually for us as sustainability managers not very satisfying, because we all know this is just secondary literature. It could be right, it could not be right at all. So there's a lack of tools and processes to collect verifiable data, especially from business partners and in the supply chain and so on. Still, there is a big gap of getting good, reliable Scope 3 data for your carbon footprint. And the second challenge is, and you probably all know that, managing and reducing Scope 3 emissions, especially for companies with complex supply chains. So I just pointed out it is still hard to get the Scope 3 data from your suppliers, but it's even harder to convince or to work with suppliers to reduce the emissions that they have. Yeah. And then taken for granted that you have suppliers who are willing to work with you on that, because you don't always have suppliers who really want to work with you on that. That's the hardest part. And we all know that Scope 3 emissions are so much higher than Scope 1 and Scope 2 together. Often the Scope 3 emissions are around 70 to 90% of your footprint. So it is necessary to have a detailed plan how to attack the Scope 3 emissions with your suppliers. So here are some companies which I found have quite a good approach to set up a good Scope 3 management within their climate transition plans. I will only, due to time issues, I will only refer to the ones above, but I suggest to also take a look at the CTPs of the other companies below to learn from them and to steer with best pride. Yeah? So let's take a look at Danone, General Mills, and Levi Strauss, including suppliers in their climate actions to reduce Scope 3. So for Danone, the engagement of their suppliers is key for their decarbonization journey. So what do? So let's take a look at some examples. One of their goals is they want their farmers and suppliers to become members in the so-called Sustainability Dairy Partnership. So the Sustainability Dairy Partnership is like an industry or a milk industry-wide approach to improve sustainability with the help of dairy producers and farmers. And since Danone has a huge footprint at the dairy farms, and I think 90%, at least 90% of their footprint also is in Scope 3, they urgently need the suppliers and farmers to join this initiative so that they learn how to reduce the farmers' footprint. Their KPI is the amount of suppliers joining this initiative, and their target was until 2023, 70% in volumes of suppliers. Yeah. So what other examples does Danone do? Another goal is to increase the climate knowledge of their suppliers. The KPI in this case is most probably the amount of suppliers trained. Target has not been communicated since this last year. Oh yeah, and this one is also a very interesting one. Danone is really actively communicating that they're looking for suppliers that have a low carbon footprint. So I can recall that when I worked for Nestle, we worked heavily on existing suppliers to reduce their footprint so that the footprint of Nestle went down. But I just love the idea when I read that. I just love the idea that to openly shout out, to look for new suppliers and to decrease with their help the total footprint. So quite nice. The last example of Danone wants to share information with suppliers on carbon emissions and practices and vice versa. And meaning they are most likely to also ask suppliers to give Danone primary data. So let's move on from Danone to General Mills. This is an extract of the climate transition plan of General Mills, focusing on their Scope 3 actions and their supplier engagement program. General Mills wants to measure and track the supplier GHG progress, and they want to implement a new GHG data tool where suppliers can enter the data. Besides taking a look at the CTP of General Mills, I also took a look at the CDP reporting, which they posted on their website. And there you can see that they will also track suppliers with time-bound action plans, as well as the amount of suppliers that have SBTi targets in place. So let's move on from the food business to the jeans business. Another best practice candidate is Levi Strauss. And Levi outlines here also the difficulties of Scope 3 and agrees with us in the following points. First of all, the absence of primary data. They don't have any primary data from their suppliers. Complex value change and changing reporting requirements. So what are their actions to address this? They want to engage with suppliers in tier 1 and tier 2, and they want to align on agreeing emission reduction targets between 40 and 60% based on the SBTi. Yeah, and they're talking about 66 suppliers that they engaged with in 2022, and they increased it to 47 suppliers in 2023. So now that we have seen some best practices on climate transition plans, where can a company integrate those Scope 3 actions, like supplier engagement plans and so on, in their CSRD reporting? So we are back again at the ESRS E1, called the climate standard. And at section E12, within management of the IROs, the standard suggests to mention the training programs or concept that a company conducts with suppliers in their supply chain. So if you are starting to train your suppliers, or if you have concept with your suppliers, you can mention them within E12 in the standard. This is just in German, so I will explain that in English. When at section E13, measures and resources, the directive requires from the company to mention all concepts and actions that decarbonize the supply chain, for example. And then last but not least, in section E16, the GHG emissions, the directive recommends to include the amount of primary data from suppliers. So actually to wrap it up, climate transition plans, we all know that they're actually not a walk in the park, because you have to really go in the details and be more on the operational side. But it is requested by the CSRD and the CSDDD. And my strong suggestion is, if you have not started to start that journey yet, I think the time is to do it now, to track your suppliers, to start the supplier engagement programs, and to set up the right KPIs to track Scope 3 emission decarbonizations. Yeah, crunch data and find the suitable ones for your company. Yeah, and this, Josefa, is actually it from my side. Important here also, use the CTP for your CSRD report if you are currently doing the CSRD report for your company. There are always overlaps that can be used. And with this, Josefa, back to you.
Nice, thank you. And I really have to say, I mean, I don't think I have ever attended a session where I was walked through so many different regulations in such a cool and colorful way. So this made all the difference, I think, for everybody here to follow it. And I think one of the biggest topics is to take the fear away of it, right? So you really made it very approachable. And also, I love the industry examples, because it showed that across industries, it is possible to move ahead. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily always need to have the perfect solution in place, but it's about a stepwise approach. Thank you so much. And I mean, you know, like looking at everything that you've been talking about, and looking also at what we particularly look at Climate Choice, right? So decarbonization of supply chains, Scope 3 actions, from a very personal perspective, and also, yeah, maybe passion. Lara and Corinna, I would like to ask the question to the two of you. How do you feel that climate transition plans really help as a structure or governance model to drive meaningful Scope 3 action? What are the key elements of it where you say people don't only look at regulation, really take this as something to drive Scope 3? Lara, maybe, I mean, you would like to kick us off, or Corinna, please just go ahead.
Love to. Thanks. Yeah, first of all, also Corinna, thanks for walking us through, right? I feel it's always, as Josefa said, everyone has a fear to really look down into what does it mean, but that really then helps to navigate it in the end and to make it a framework that can help you. So what I really loved is what you showed in the beginning, and that's playing back to this, how can it be a structure or framework to help us to see, first of all, it's part of CSRD and CSDDD for now. So far, we just hear there could come like more frameworks and standardization. I think that potentially can help, right? But it still would have this framework of saying, okay, it has a different elements, you need to look into it. And it also plays into other reporting areas. So the TCFD for financial reporting or the carbon disclosure project. So many companies are using that already. So maybe you have been doing already the work and you can use it here, but it could potentially coming under the sustainability reporting also give sustainability and procurement leaders like really an argument to drive forward strategic change. And that's what I also loved in this whole discussion about Omnibus, despite like all the different changes that I also see maybe potentially critical in there. But where it would really help is if we bring in like a standardized framework, and that's already the climate transition plan, where you're not just looking into the past and reporting on emissions that have been created already or like actions that happened in the past, but what you do in this plan is really to create a path forward, how you want to reduce emissions along your whole value creation, so including the value chain, and how you collaborate on that with your partners. And we have been working with many companies now in the Scope 3 action group to really do that, to make it very practical and not just focus on reporting so everyone working in that group can use the results for reporting, but first and foremost to really start a conversation internally, get everyone, including the C-level or especially the C-level, on board, and really say what also Corinna highlighted, what are our targets, how can it create value, which budgets do we align to that, and then also which partners already help us in aligning this transition, and how can we create a successful competitive advantage out of it, rather than just always a year later reporting on what already happened. And that's, I think, really the main exciting part of it, that you have like a strong tool that you can share also internally in your company and really say, that's what we need to work on right now, and it will bring us forward. And let's plan how we get there.
Yeah, maybe, and maybe I just add on to that, Lara. For me, really, the climate transition plan is nothing about regulations. It's really something that you as a company need to look at with your suppliers, with other experts, be it NGOs, be it university, and so on, to really define in details, and this is really the hardest part ever, how you want to reduce the footprint. It's not about the reporting. The reporting is CSRD, it's other stuff, you know? CTP is really go into details, go into where the most emissions are, often it's Scope 3, and then really define together with your partners, with your supply chain, with your expert, how you want to reduce them. It's not about pilot projects anymore. Pilot projects should be something that you have done in the past. This is really looking forward, going into the operational activities. And this is, I know this is the hardest part, but it's also the fun part. Regulation is not the fun part. You know, CTP is more the fun part, really. It's hard, but it's the fun part.
Yeah, cool. And I think, I mean, this is a very good transition to the next question that we got, because Corinna, you've also been saying that a lot of companies are still relying on secondary data, right? So, which you also mentioned to be quite unsatisfying, because now you want to move into action. So, of course, you need good data quality in order to identify the hotspots that you can best leverage. So, what kind of practical steps would you suggest companies to take in order to then also increase the use of primary supplier data within the shaping of their climate transition plans?
Yeah, so what we've done, what I've done was really to talk with your most important suppliers, pick the most important suppliers that you have, set up learning lessons, let them understand how important the primary data is. ask for how far are they within their own CCF, with own PCFs that could be important for your company, and then really define which are the suppliers that you can move on to get primary data from, and to also let them know it is important for your company to get the primary data, and maybe put some money behind it and say, okay, if you want to be a supplier within the next 10 years, well, then it's important for us. You have to understand this. I know that procurement in the past was more about having savings in place, but in the future, you have to switch on the KPIs that are more important to the suppliers. Maybe it's not about savings anymore. Maybe it's about some other activities within CO2 or sustainability. So at Nestle, there for sure was a clear communication about how important primary data is to get your CC, their corporate carbon footprint, better in place.
Yeah, thank you. And Lara, I mean, you've been moving the climate data sphere now for quite some time also. Would very much welcome also to get your point of view on this question. What do you see? I mean, working with so many companies also from across the world and across industries. What is your stance on this?
Yeah, I think again, in our Scopes Reaction Group, we experience so much like also how diverse the market is. So even so, Corinna shared now, it's not longer the time for pilots. I would say that maybe not even all of the big global companies have been doing that work so far, right? I feel it's right now really with the regulations that are coming in place, but then also with the market pressure that all the other customers, like when you work B2B, are asking for that information, that right now everyone is creating this intersection between sustainability and procurement. So often also the role sustainability procurement is rather new, maybe then also in smaller or medium-sized companies. And now everyone is really starting to get there. And I really love the approach that Corinna shared. So that's also what we see as a best practice, to really work with the 20 suppliers that are creating your 80% of emissions first, maybe, or maybe even more. Start a conversation, but then also show that you have a structured way forward and that it's not just a one-time assessment or like a collection of data, but that you really bring it as a structural selection process of suppliers, evaluation process, and then that you also reward them if there is a certain action happening. So some companies are starting supplier days specifically on sustainability. Others are creating, we are working right now with a company that's creating a standard for their whole industry actually, and like sharing a guideline and best practices. So also sourcing from your suppliers, who are the outliers, what can we really learn from them, leveraging the others, developing them, but then also making it clear until when is our threshold. So maybe the 5 years going forward, we need to have this and this. And then also learn from your partners and suppliers again, like which actions can we take together? So are there maybe also best practices that help us increase efficiency or reduce costs and so on? And they are often, or we see that as often customers tell us they are super surprised to find out some suppliers are far ahead from whom they haven't expected it. And from them, they might learn even that due to their changes, they have created more value by reduced costs or creating a new product and so on, and really go into these leverage factors rather than making it just a reporting exercise and like in one-time connection where you have no exchange, but really make it, on the other hand, a mutual exchange and show that you create a path forward together.
So actually then also working in a feedback loop, right? So that it's not a one-time data provision where afterwards you think, oh my God, now I did all this work on my side and it's ending up in a black hole and the other company actually doesn't do anything with it. Yeah.
No, and maybe to add to that also, you also need to discuss with the suppliers how to interchange the data, which is also a very important step. These days there need to be, software included and stuff like that. So it's not a one-time shot. It's really a continuous working together. Yeah.
Yeah, like a loop. Yeah, correct. Thank you. And now, Corinna, you've been showing this very drastic statistic where you said that only 25% of companies have a transition plan in place, but then also only two actually meet expectations. What needs to change? Also, what are like the biggest, so to say, pitfalls that companies run in, or hurdles that hold companies back from setting it up? I know that you mentioned some of them, but maybe we can have a more in-depth discussion on it, because the question is then also on how to overcome it. So on these biggest challenges, what kind of levers can people use in order to then also set up a climate transition plan?
Yeah. So, like we said, 25% only have a climate transition plan in place. And only, I think, 2% have like a satisfying climate transition plan in place. Those are the figures you're talking about, right, Joseph?
Yes, correct.
Okay, correct. So, I think from my point of view, a lot of companies have already worked on climate transition plans, going into details, going into projects, rolling out the activities on a bigger scope, not only talking about the pilot project, but they have not really communicated it. So since there is a pressure from the regulation, and this is, yeah, it is a pressure, and yes, you have to do it. But I think now these days, they open up and they have to present what they have been already working on. So I think the amount of companies will increase, and has already been increased in the last 12 months, but it will increase even more because there is a pressure from the regulations that you have to, open up to it and talk about what you have been working on. So first of all, it's a pressure of the regulations, and on the other side also, I think there is a big need of, as a company, not to only set targets like SBTI targets, but to really work on how you want to accomplish these targets. Because I've talked to a lot of companies who have set themselves SBTI targets, and then they put the documents in the cupboard and say, okay, let's see how this will evolve. But actually, it's a lot of work to achieve those targets. And there have been some companies also who resigned from SBTI targets because they don't know how to really reach those targets, you know? So I think there's also a pressure from setting SBTI targets and then really work on how a company wants to achieve them.
Thank you. And Lara, maybe a slightly deviated question now to you. Because Corinna has also already mentioned, right? It's a question on agreeing with your suppliers also, or with your network of partners on how you exchange data, for example. But then it's not a one-time shot, but it's actually about measuring also progress over time so that you actually see that you really get towards your targets as planned with your actions and from the climate transition plan. Can you maybe say from your experience now also what kind of role technology and digitization play in accelerating climate transition planning?
Yeah, I think that really goes to the question like where are the biggest challenges? And we are always surprised to see that digitalization is still like one of the major challenges, right? Even though we are talking now in an area of AI, it's not yet that we are leveraging really data in all different departments. And if we do so, often the different tools used are not connected. So what we see really is that data collection can be scaled drastically by using digital tools. So it's not longer the student assistant who's typing in different data points and then you have a dot instead of a comma and everything goes sideways. But also really make this data actionable. So by saving all the time of using digital tools and having correct and audit-ready data, you can then also use it really across teams. And that is, I think, the second barrier right now, that often everything, and we are here also discussing, right, mainly reporting. So then it's sustainability often ties back to one department or even one person being the person who just collects the data and just fills it in. But on the other hand, really to use the data to have transparency, what's going on in your supply chain, really measuring the risk from there as well. So you talk the language of everyone in your C-level and in the financial department, and then from there creating action. And that needs then the whole team, specifically procurement, being part of it. And there we see that the data brings really the foundation for the transparency, but then also to really move forward and get into actions and That's what we love to then leverage with our customers to really bring in a sustainability approach that ties to the procurement and to your strategic budget decisions and really transforms from within the whole company.
Cool. And now there's just one last sentence, please, for the two of you, very short. Companies that are just getting started looking into their climate transition planning exercise, what piece of advice would you give? Very short. Corinna, you go. Shoot.
Take most important stakeholders, suppliers, experts in the climate transition plan phase and work with them together.
Cool. Very good. Lara, you.
Leverage the network effect and share best practices with other leaders because everyone is in the same place, and do that in our webinars or the next summit.
Yeah, very cool. And that being said, have a look on our webpage, as Lara was mentioning. We host again the Climate Transformation Summit in June on the 4th and 5th. And we would, of course, love to have you there. So there's a lot of experts from sustainability and procurement coming together to share exactly these best practices. And also, you will receive an invite soon for the next Climate Choice webinar that we will be hosting together with BASF. So we will have Alessandro Pesticcio with us. He's the Director for Sustainability Digital Strategy Projects there. And we will be looking at how they are leveraging product carbon footprints for economic viability. And with that being said, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. A special thank you, of course, then also to Corinna and Lara. It was a pleasure. I personally learned a lot again. And I think, I mean, in this universe, there's always something to learn, but today I enjoyed it very, very much. And yeah, I'm now starting my afternoon. I refreshed. And thank you so much and see you again very soon. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye to everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.